Welcome to this episode of Life in Him. My name is Pontus J. Back, and today we're sitting here with Pastor Jay in Citra, Florida. Jay is the pastor of a church. He rides a motorcycle and he has animals here on his farm. We came here yesterday and we have stayed here and we have had a great time. This is like living out in the nature. So we're thankful to be here.
We're grateful you're here.
And tell me a little bit about yourself. You're a pastor today, but where do you come from? Who are you?
Well, I guess I originated in Mississippi. I was born and raised in Mississippi. I left at 17 years old and joined the Marine Corps, saw the world, had some unique experiences in the Marine Corps. When I came back, I got into rock and roll music. Was a silent partner in a nightclub for a while. Ran sound and was on the road off and on for years. Living the life of a typical musician. Drugs and rock and roll. Lots of alcohol. Kind of just a crazy existence for a while. And settled down. Have a child now, a child that's 21 years old now, 21. And over the years, I kept trying to find God in my life, but it just never worked because I never could believe that God could forgive me for the things that I'd done, the things that I'd been involved in. And so I kept reverting back into alcohol and back into drugs. And ultimately that led me to rehab. And a couple of weeks into rehab, I felt the Lord wrap his arms around me. There's just no other way to explain that. And you and I talked yesterday about being born again, and I was what we normally would consider born again at 13. I knew Jesus. I knew I wanted to follow Jesus. But there was that guilt complex that prevented me from having that spiritual relationship, which ultimately led me to seek approval in any way, which was the drugs and the alcohol. But at 39 years old, I was saved, and I knew it. I knew what it meant to have a spiritual self and a physical self, one driven by flesh versus one that was driven by the Spirit of the Lord that lived within me. And it was profound. And I began not only to learn to love others, but to love myself. And it was 3 years after that before the Lord actually called me into ministry. And again, it's the amazing story of hearing the voice of the Lord, just as if you and I are sitting here together. When the Lord called me to preach, and I couldn't imagine what the Lord was going to do with the long-haired tattooed biker, redneck, hippie. I said, what are you going to do with me? And a couple of weeks into it, he directed me again. And I started ministering to those that I hung out with, essentially, bikers. And, excuse my dog.
I love your dog. Yeah, good company.
But doors just kept opening. And I began doing prison ministry in Mississippi. And that was intense. But it gave me a passion. That was where my passion really formed, was in prison. And I was very antisocial most of my life. I didn't like crowds. I had trouble around people. I was scared to death the first time that I went into preaching prison. But a group of guys prayed for me right before then, for my first time, like 2 minutes before I walked up to the pulpit. And by the time I got to the pulpit, I could just actually feel the fear falling off of me. And I was hooked. I mean, I knew that that's what God had, when he said it, he meant what he said. God is who he says he is, and he does what he says he'll do. And he did. And over the next 2 years, he opened the doors up for us to move down to Florida, to buy this beautiful 10-acre farm. We raise specialty show cattle. We raise meat goats, as they call them. We actually raise them to sell. We don't raise them for slaughter. And in the church, this church was born out of a need in a community that is a mission field. There are some really great people in this community, but there's some serious addiction, and that's where God brought us. And we haven't done anything. God's done this. He has brought a group of people that turned into a family, people that felt unlovable or couldn't love themselves or were hopeless. Some have been in the throes of addiction, some have been in prison. Some just didn't fit into traditional church, and we are far from tradition.
What's tradition anyway?
Well, yeah, we let the Lord lead. We don't plan things as such. I can't write a sermon until Saturday night, before Sunday morning. I have to wait for the Lord's time, not my time. I know so many people that say they start writing their sermons on Monday or Tuesday, and I'm like, I just can't do it. Every time, by the time I get to Saturday, everything's changed. And I'm just amazed to be able to be led by the Lord completely. It seems so foreign to live any other way now.
Yeah, if we go back to when you were at the rehab, and you felt God that He put your arms around you. What really happened there? Was it like a church meeting or?
No, it was a counseling session. There were about 12, 14 people in the room. This was 2 weeks into it was an inpatient rehab. And, I was being the typical wannabe badass. That's the only way to put it. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to show my emotions. I didn't want for them to see me cry or anything like that. And we were sitting in there talking, one by one, talking about things, and all of a sudden, I just broke down, and I just felt the presence of the Lord in me, and I went to my knees. And while I was on my knees, I was basically almost in a cuddled up position, and I felt the Lord's arms come around me and hold me. And it was the most phenomenal thing in the world. And I didn't tell anybody for over a year what happened, because it was, I think for too many people, I would think it was too hard for them to believe. And even my wife, I didn't tell her for over a year. And it was a sense that I was loved. Just what it says, we're declared righteous despite our sins, despite who we are, despite who we were. I knew right then that God, I won't say God didn't care, but he says, you know what, we're gonna move on from today. And it's developed a saying that I have in the church. And I can't say that I coined this phrase, but I tell the congregation almost every week, you can't move forward while you're looking back at the past. And it was that moment that I was able to transition and quit looking back at the past and dwelling in the past. The past teaches us, but when we stay there, we can't focus on today. And that was the difference for me. That was the beginning of turning around to being able to focus on today and forgetting yesterdays.
So how has it then been over the years? I know that before I was a Christian, to me it appeared that you had to be perfect and you had to be like this and you had to be like that. But I have learned myself that the change starts on the inside. Mm-hmm. And how did you experience that God started to change your life?
I'll tell you one thing. The things that used to be fun weren't fun anymore. That's the simplest way to put it. The things that were not of God that were fun didn't mean anything anymore. God took that desire away. And that was the beginning of that for me. And I don't even think I've told you this yet. Being a musician, I used to love to listen to all kinds of rock and roll. it is a very rare moment that I will listen to rock and roll anymore. Because most of the stuff that I hear in rock takes me back to the days of my drinking and drugging. I'm not saying rock and roll is bad for everybody, but I know what it was for me. And I don't tend to gravitate towards the things that I used to. I want to be in the moment with God all the time now. So it just, God changed that.
Yeah, you know? I was a musician myself, and today God allows me to use that gift for
His purpose.
Yeah, for His purpose.
Well, and that's a good segue into what I quit playing music after 2008. I put down my guitars. I didn't play music. I quit singing. And when I first started doing prison ministry, we had worship teams, music worship teams, and I started playing guitar again. And I found a passion again that I had lost. And honestly, my guitars had dust all over them. I couldn't get rid of them, but I really didn't see that I was going to ever play again. And through Christian music, my passion has been restored, and now I play every Sunday. I mean, we were a small church, so I'm the worship leader as well as the pastor. And I can't wait for Sundays to come around so I can play. You know, last night I rehearsed until 1 o'clock this morning, just because I love to play now, but I'm playing for God.
It's a big difference.
It is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
And we practiced while we were living in the world. And today we can do something good with those skills we have.
God's glory can be found through all situations.
Because He's the creator of everything.
Amen.
What would you say? You mentioned here in the community and people that have come to your church. You mentioned the word hopeless. Are there hopeless cases for God?
No. There's nobody out there that can't be saved. There's nobody out there whose life can't be turned around by God. I was at the bottom of that barrel, of that ditch. You know, I knew I knew what rock bottom was, and I had lost my home, my wife, every friend except one. And I mean, that was a lot. I mean, I made quite a bit of friends over the years. I had one friend left. And my truck, I mean, I didn't have anything to myself, to my name anymore. And I'd been in and out of the hospital the last couple of months because of the alcohol and the combination of the drugs. And God turned me around. And I look at that all the time. I said, man, look what God did with my life. There's no hopeless people out there. There's no need for hopeless people out there. Let's put it that way. We can all be saved.
So if there's somebody watching out there that's right now thinking negative thoughts about himself or herself and thinking that he's a hopeless case, what would you like to tell those people? How because I lived like you for many years. We have so many things in common, but nobody never told me how to get saved.
Right.
So how do you tell people about salvation?
It's tough and it's easy to explain that. If you're out there and you're struggling and you have that hopeless feeling, I'll tell you the best thing in the world is to get on your knees. Say, Lord, I can't do it without you. I realize that I'm wrong for trying to do it my own way, and that I want to be one of your children. You ask the Lord to come into your heart, to lead every moment. And that's the start. It's that, you know, it's almost like you plant your own seed. And you know, I love that. So many pastors use that as, you know, we have to plant that seed. Jesus talked about it. But it's a good analogy for us today to relate to, that when you think about the garden and it starts out as a little bitty plant and it grows, it takes all of his time. I mean, I knew God grabbed a hold of me in 2008, and it was 2011 before he set me on this road to preach, to be a pastor. And then there was another 2 years before we actually got the church going. I mean, it's a process, and it just like that little plant that grows into a great big tree.
Yeah, it takes
You
time.
know, so don't be discouraged. It's going to take time.
And what's been encouragement for me is to have that knowledge that I'm never going to be perfect.
I stand up most every Sunday and I look at the congregation and I say, I am just as broken as you are. We all are. And there's a fine line in what I'm going to say, but we beat ourselves up so often for not being perfect. And God doesn't care how many mistakes you make, as long as you have a repentant heart. Now, you know, the Apostle Paul made that comment of, if Jesus allows us to be forgiven of all sins, should we just go on sinning? And he says, of course not, we shouldn't. And that's that fine line I'm talking about. But to understand that you're gonna make mistakes, and as long as you have that repentant heart, that's the key. You know, but you've got to believe that God will forgive you. And I believe that God forgave everybody, but I couldn't believe he would forgive me for so many years. And I can't really give you a good reason as to why I thought that, because I looked around and I saw so many other people that had done horrible things that had ended up following Christ. Why couldn't I? But you need to find this. I think this is along your lines of asking about, what about somebody that's hopeless out there? You need to find a good church family. I spent most of my life believing that you didn't have to have fellowship, that I could have a one-on-one relationship with Christ. You've got to find a Christian family to get your base, to get your foundation. So along with having that repentant heart and confessing that you can't do it without the Lord and that he is King of all kings, you've got to get into a church family, because you need people to be accountable to. And they need you too. You may not understand that right now, but they're going to need you. I've got young people in this church. One in particular is 22 years old. And that kid comes up with stuff all the time. I had disagreement with someone a few weeks ago, and we didn't talk for 3 or 4 days. And this young 22-year-old came to me and he says, do you realize just how much the two of you are helping people in this community? You two need to go make up right now. This young kid is telling me stuff that I just told him 6 months ago. That's what I'm talking about having a church family, is that we help each other grow.
And we're a team.
And we are.
Because it's like a football team, and not everybody can be a goalie or anything. We have our different positions. Some are teachers, some are pastors, some are evangelists, and I'm thankful that I'm the evangelist, so I can preach the same message in different places. I don't have to stay up on Saturday night for write a sermon. But it's so nice to have you here, and God bless you and your church, and we know that God will meet your needs when you open up your heart for Him.
Yes, He will.
Like where I was on my deathbed, I said, Jesus, if you're real, help me. And He's the reason I'm here today. And Pastor Jay here he's another living testimony about God's existence and His love. He loves us all. So until next time, stay blessed.